Thank you guys so much for coming today. It's really hard following Simon. I don't know who organized this, that I had to go after him. Oh, wait. Thanks, Marcus. So I was preparing for this talk and going over it with my 7-year-old daughter, who's creating a slideshow for the first time in first grade. And she goes, "You need to include a Bitmoji," which she had to tell me what it was. And you need something about Harry Potter, because she's reading it right now. And you need a song. You'll get 2 of the 3. Although if you were in London last year, you would have gotten the song, because it was my other daughter's birthday, and I had everybody sing happy birthday. I won't make you do it this year. Anyway, today I'm going to talk to you about our move from QA at Blackboard to engineering productivity, and one of our first projects as an EP team. My hope is that you'll walk away with some concrete examples to help you if you find yourself about to embark on any type of culture change or shift, and you need to get teams fully thinking about testing and beyond just your tester. Just some housekeeping. Here's my Twitter handle. I use it maybe every time I'm at a conference, and that's about it. But if you contact me on there, I will get back to you at some point. And you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to correspond anytime outside of this. So about a year ago, we were facing a major challenge at Blackboard. We had a team that had created an automation suite, but it had been disbanded. This has happened a couple times at Blackboard now, where we get a team, they build some tests, and they say, "Oh, great, we have tests. These team members can now go work on other projects." Has that ever happened to any of you before? Yeah, a few times, right? You'd think we'd learn our lesson at Blackboard, but we're getting there. The tests existed, but that was about it. We were lucky enough to get an automation engineer, Eric, who is right here to keep me honest today, from our mobile department to start looking into reviving the suite. And I worked very closely with him to start looking at what was going on with the tests. And results were all over the place. Not only were our results a mess, you could just see where we had as many failures as we did passing tests. We constantly had a failing build. And it was never the same ones failing twice. And the yellow represents our skip tests. We had a lot of tests that were doing nothing. Some people had been adding in skeletons, trying to maybe think about BDD, but never got around to implementing the actual test behind it. Some were pulled eventually because they weren't reliable. And the constantly failing builds were a quick way for our developers to stop caring about them. And the notifications had become white noise. Not only were our results a mess, but our time to execute was high. We had about 400 tests total, and it took an hour to run them. 30 of them were okay, but it was still kind of slow, and it took 20 minutes to run just those 30. It wasn't all bad. Even though it was slow, those 30 tests did provide a gate. They were trusted, they were reliable, and at least for those 30 tests, we were preventing bad stuff from going through. Unfortunately, on the bright side, I should say, developers all agreed that the team owned quality, but it's really hard in practice. Schedule pressures start to set in, and best intentions were basically laid to waste, where with your head, you're thinking, yes, we own quality, and then, oh, let's go do the work. Oh, sorry, nope, we can't write these tests now. So we needed to learn from our past, but how could we move forward? We needed a leader that had done the transformation we were hoping to accomplish. We have very talented people, but we needed that leadership in place that had taken us from, okay, let's write some suites and now go look at other projects, to let's write some suites, let's maintain them, let's get the entire organization, not just the Scrum teams, caring about this. So we brought somebody in that would actually end up changing the fabric of our team as we know it. And we would no longer be called a group of testers. Are any of you familiar with this book? I don't see many hands except for 5. Get it. There's a lot of good testing books out there, but when you're really looking to make a major change, this has been probably the best guide I've seen for us. Many of our changes today stem from this book. Of course, we've tailored some things based on our culture at Blackboard and things that we need to do, but largely, look at this. First, we wanted to look at our department and what we wanted to be. Is our job to just test? No. And this is one of the quotes that resonated and drives almost everything we do today. So we're here to enable the development teams to own testing and own quality. We are not just the testers. So it started with transforming our department, and we no longer refer to ourselves as QA. When we first started, I was reminded of the taboo game with the buzzer, and we're sitting around with our new director, and somebody's like, the QA team, and he goes, nah, that's not it. Every time, and it's really hard to break that habit. So when you've been calling yourself QA for 12 years, like I've been at Blackboard, you start referring to yourself as EP takes a bit, but it's okay. So here's your Harry Potter reference, Emma. Hope you enjoy it. The name that is taboo. So with our department renamed, we wanted to establish our mission. I don't remember ever having a mission statement in my career beyond the corporate level. And I'm so glad we did this. It's driven our goals and initiatives and priorities, and it's helped us make decisions to ensure we're fulfilling this mission. I think all too often, teams they don't have that guiding light. And when you have your full mission as a department, it makes it so much easier to drive forward and keep towards that. So with this in place, it's time to set up some goals. And our first goal. First, we want to make sure our framework enabled Scrum teams to add and remove tests easily. For this particular project that we started with, the framework itself was largely in place. With another team I'm working on, we're starting from scratch completely. But that might be another topic for another day when we get there. But anyways, the idea here is easily maintainable and extensible framework. We've also had frameworks in the past that we've had to abandon because the people that built them left. They built them from scratch, but nobody knew how to use them or work them or do anything with them. Then we wanted to enable the automatic and early detection of failures. While we were running some of our tests on every merge, the 30 that I was talking about, we still had a lot that were only run once a sprint and not trusted. Again, the 370 tests that were unreliable. So how are we actually detecting failures and preventing them? So once we could detect failures, our next goal was to prevent those failures from going any further downstream in our pipeline. And keep in mind, we only had the 33 tests I mentioned as a true gate, and we had to improve that. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Blackboard online education, but we have probably more features than we probably ever should. However, the 33 tests represented what we saw as the most critical at the time, but still not enough, especially as user-centric as we are. And of course, we wanted to do all of this without impacting the engineers' time. If we made this difficult or incredibly time-consuming for them moving forward, how could we ever get their buy-in or willingness to contribute for anything that they were working on? So note nowhere in any of these goals do I ever state we're going to go in and write tests for you. It's the key thing that we move forward with. So to meet our goals, we wanted a team that owned the automation strategy for that product. So we created Team Shangri-La and would model other teams very similarly, all named after mythical places that we have not yet gotten to at Blackboard, and hopefully we will. So we have Xanadu, Lilliput, Avalon, and El Dorado. But we started with the product owner, and for this team, that's me. And as PO, I set the business priorities for the team. I own the backlog, and everything I do, I prioritize based on our mission and goals. I also work closely with our client, who are the engineers. And I help define and investigate not only what would make their lives easier, but what we think they need. And sometimes we tell them what they need, and even if they don't like it. Next, we looked at our Scrum Master. How many of you have a Scrum team with a Scrum Master that is not trained? Yes. This is the single best thing I think we could have ever done. One of our team members went and got Scrum Master certification, and let me tell you, it's like night and day working on a team like that. I've been on teams where we just kind of wing it, do our own backlog grooming. Nobody keep us honest. Oh, we can bring that into a sprint, it's fine. This team member keeps us honest. She does not let us bring in any story unless we have all defined acceptance criteria, and every single person on the team, whether you're going to own it or not, understands that story and understands the acceptance criteria. And she makes sure that we adhere to our definition of done. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But get this person. Next, we looked at our SETs, our software engineers and tests. These are ultimately the people that would do much of the work. We had a lot ahead of us to meet our goals. And so we started around September this mass hiring, just building out our teams. This was one of the ones we were focused on. And we placed 4 SETs at the time. Today we're at 2, just because of the nature of the work and how smoothly, or not smoothly, it's been going, but it's been fine. And then we hired a feature engineer, and this is something we've never done before, and I wish we had done it. What we found was a person on our feature development team that's been there a while, has the established trust of the developers, but she was super passionate about fixing testing because she wants good code too, and she wanted to help make it right. She has fortunately agreed to join our team full time. It started as like a trial, and she found out, hey, I kind of like working with this team here. So if you can find this person, they are like a unicorn, but if you get them, never let them go. I don't care what you have to throw at them. She's been critical to our success. And one of the key pieces to our success as well is having the continuous integration and delivery team member. I think now you're finding a lot of people hiring for the full skill set for automation engineer with DevOps or CI experience. But what we've done is embedded someone from our separate CI team into our Scrum team. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One, the team was already in place. We didn't really need to go looking for new hires. But we also found, like with the engineer, that the best way to initiate change at Blackboard, which is a 20-year-old company almost, that you find somebody that's been there a while, they have those established relationships. When you're about to make a lot of changes, especially in your pipeline and the testing that's about to go in it, it's just been a lot better for us to have that respect of other engineers with the current team. And so having this person come in has been instrumental to being able to be an agent of change. And from my perspective, and it's not just because I'm embedded on this team, I think we're one of the best functioning agile teams that we have in our department. And we still have a long way to go, but having been on agile teams over the last 7 years at Blackboard, this is the best example I think I've seen of implementing it. And I think it's all due to the fact that we understand our stories, our acceptance criteria, we're constantly grooming our backlog, we understand our priorities, and we just all work really well together and have built a huge sense of team. So with our team in place, what did we start with? Nobody reads it. It is so true what Simon says, but it is like pulling teeth. But I do want to iterate that the documentation that we created, it was painful. We spent way too long creating it, probably about 3 sprints worth. But we found that, it was very important. We were hiring a lot of people, and we had nothing available to them to all get on the same page coming in. especially when you're trying to instrument change at this level in a department and scale it, and they have nothing to reference other than a presentation that you're giving them or walking them through. It's nice when you don't have to answer the same question 5 times a day. Say, oh, you can go read this wiki link. So let's just go through a little bit. I do think, and Eric can attest to this, that the Shangri-La team was about to declare mutiny on me when I said, hey guys, we need some documentation, and they said I quit. But the most important thing in my mind was our definition of done. I don't think I can stress how important it is to establish this. These 2 statements were agreed upon by the team, and it's been our driving force for all of our user stories, and not just within Shangri-La, but for all of our Scrum teams within engineering productivity. And it ensures that everything we do is reviewed, communicated, and released, whether it's documentation or code, anything we can come up with. I've seen a lot of people and teams say they were done, but they had not been tested or released. And they just meant they were done because, oh, I've submitted my pull request, I'm good, even without getting the feedback from the pull request. And with our definition of done, we also needed to look at our test suite definitions. We realized that not everybody was on the same page very quickly. Our test suites were called a few different names. We wanted to standardize that to get everybody speaking the same language, so we created a whole lexicon, not just about our tests, but everything we were using and the tools within it. Some were calling them end-to-end, others UI integration, others automated UAT. We wanted to get that settled, and we settled on our UI suite and our end-to-end suite. They also had very different testing philosophies. So depending on the team, you'd see very different types of tests. Some going very high level, some going very low and deeper in just the unit and integration, which was great. Some people wanted to test everything. But let's take a look at each thing we defined. And so starting with our goals, for each suite, we wanted to ask, what is the intent? What we try to do now is ask a question that we want answered for our unit. Is my code good enough to even warrant a code review? Or for an end-to-end, we'll show some examples in a bit, but is my code even worthy of going into production as a user, from a user's perspective? And then we looked at what would trigger the tests. Is it on the creation of a pull request? Is it on merge to develop? We had people that didn't actually know we were running tests when they merged their code. So they would check stuff in and merge it on a Friday afternoon and be completely shocked when they came in on Monday that their change had not, in fact, actually made it to develop. And we wanted to change that, and we wanted people to know when their tests were being run. We also wanted to look at our gates. So what happens if these tests fail? And honestly, if they're not gated, what's the point? We've found that it's really hard to get engineers to pay attention if there's no repercussions for their work. And then we looked at requirements for each suite. How fast do we want them to run? If you're looking at an end-to-end suite, is it really okay to have something running 4 to 8 hours? We wanted to look at, do we need to look at timing? Are they key workflows? And in some cases, we had to look at what is a key workflow, because not everybody had the same idea of what that was, and we wanted to standardize that. Look at also, are there environment requirements? So more importantly, we wanted to make it clear what not to test for that suite. We found teams have thrived by example, and that means also showing them what not to do. So here's an example of the unit suite for our product that we call Ultra, and how we define the goal, the trigger, the gate condition, and the requirements. We do include some other useful information, more specific to people actually working at Blackboard, but I think this is still a good working example of what you can provide for your teams. Things that we've found helpful are tooling, where the tests live. So if it's like day one and you need to go look at them, go in Stash and find it. And the responsible groups. This has also been really important for us to establish the ownership. And here's our end-to-end suite as an example. And this is primarily what the Shangri-La team that I work with owns. although we do help set guidelines for unit tests, even though the developers own them. But we work very closely. Like I said, we had the engineer. Because we're owning the automation for that product, we still want to make sure we have the right strategies and guidelines in place. And like I said, the good guiding light for all team members coming in. So as we worked out our guidelines, we also needed to work on the environments. And we were going from a traditional VM, which could only support one job at a time, and it had to be manually installed and maintained. And we also needed to rerun all setup steps each time. It was really slow, and this was what was causing a lot of our pain as far as development time, dependencies. So our first improvement in our environment was to migrate to Mesos. And here you can see we've started to containerize everything. This opened up the possibility for per branch pipelines for us, and we could fully automate reprovisioning. And our time-consuming steps were only run once per day instead of every time we ran the job. And as a very high-level overview, and if you do have detailed questions about implementation, Eric is here to help me answer them. So Mesos is like our network OS that aggregates individual servers into pools of resources that Jenkins and Marathon run on top of. Jenkins uses Mesos to build and test our products, and Marathon uses Mesos to run our products. And Docker provides the containers, of course, for our services and jobs to run in. And after all of that work was done to migrate to Mesos, it led us to the Jenkins Pipeline. So now we can run multiple branches at a time instead of waiting in a massive queue. Keep in mind we have around 60 developers checking in at a time some days, just depends. So that could be quite long, especially if your tests are taking 20 minutes to run to get feedback on. So now we have this possibility of having the sub-jobs in Jenkins and being able to run them in parallel with the unit tests as well for every branch that we have. So this helps us to meet our goal that we talked about earlier to establish faster feedback and detection, as these are now run, like I said, on every commit. And very shortly, once we get through our swath of environment issues that we saw come crashing down today, we'll be gating these. But we do have some investigation to do because this is still very, very new for us. And by new, I mean we rolled this out last week. So we're hoping that our glitches clear up very soon. But now that we've had the processes in place and the environment capabilities, it was time for us to enter what I like to call our consulting phase and get to work on the tests. The teams were now enabled to meet the standards that our team had set out for them and use the environment infrastructure. The key part of this in starting with a project is getting an executive sponsor because they are what has to pitch, hey, let's go spend 100 engineers' time on writing tests to build quality. That is a very expensive ask. Just think about a salary times 100 and say, whoop, we're going to use their time this way. So having that leadership buy-in was critical to get started and improve the cost of finding things earlier and prevention. So with around 9 Scrum teams overall working on this particular product, we could not do the work ourselves. Remember, we're a team of 6, and we had all of these people submitting to the code. If you remember with our goals, we were enabling teams, not doing the work for them. So like I said, we become consultants. And we started with 2 teams to pilot and proof our work and see if we needed to make any iterations. And then we gradually added to the rest of the feature teams in tackling around 30 features overall, I think. That's about right. So if we're not writing the tests, what would we provide the teams? We agreed to provide planning support to them and help them come up with their backlog items and stories to groom and agree what to pull in. We would provide support to Scrum team members in writing the tests. We're not going to write them for you, but if you get stuck on something, of course, please come to us. If we also agreed to review their work, and we still require this, if you're submitting a test as a pull request, you're required to have a member of Shangri-La review it for the standards that we've set out in the guidelines. Best intentions are there. We have the documentation for how-tos, but really we're the ones that live and breathe this every single day. And as we enable the developers to live and breathe it every day too, there's still a learning process. So we want our team on pull request for now. We also, of course, wanted to help teams run tests more frequently. So when we first started, there were the 33 tests running on every merge, but that wasn't enough for us, especially the rate of change that comes in. And we also were running just at every sprint. So we need to make that faster, and all of the environment changes that we made have enabled us to do so. And we would, of course, assist team members with reviewing the results. It's a skill you have to learn. Maybe it's easier for a developer, but sometimes you have test engineers that have learned automation. So we would do that and continue framework support. So each team was tasked with reviewing all tests that were desired for the given feature. We did this by implementing risk analysis, which I'll go into detail about in a few minutes. And teams had to ensure tests met the guidelines established as part of our documentation. So keep in mind, end-to-end test was new for many, and we did provide best practices to teams. They also had to ensure end-to-end tests were stable for their feature once they worked on them. So it wasn't enough to submit a pull request, have a test go straight into the pipeline. They're end-to-end tests, they're UI-based tests. By nature, they could be flaky. And then we wanted them, once they proved their stability, then we gave them permission to go ahead and introduce that into the pipeline and prevent failures from moving further downstream. So the purpose of the risk analysis worksheet is to guide prioritization of tests in order to reduce project risk. The idea is to facilitate a conversation with your team. A long time ago at Blackboard, it was just the tester coming up with all the tests. This is a team activity, and you agree what tests will be maintained going forward and how they'll be written. And this worksheet was derived from Rex Black's Managing the Testing Process, another great book, but we've simplified it to get teams started and learning how to do this, and then we might be adding in more and more complexity as we go. So first, the team decides what are the quality risks or the potential scenarios that could present a risk. Depending on the feature, the total listed will vary. So for example, a less complex feature at Blackboard like roster, I think we saw about 10 potential scenarios. Grading, we saw over 200. So it just depends what you're looking at. And what we did here was list out all existing tests, whether they're unit or UI-based or manual, and we'd add more if we thought things may be missing and went from there. And we're applying this now to features that have no tests today, and it's a much more difficult process because those features were developed 15 years ago. The technical experts no longer with us, and now we're trying to read through the code to figure out what the feature did sometimes. But it requires involvement from the entire team to do this. So for each quality risk, it's time to discuss the likelihood of a bug occurring in that area. So some questions you might ask and it's on a scale, we use 1 through 4, but some questions you might ask are how often do bugs in this test area occur? So we went into Jira, looked up our bug stats. Some were a bit more egregious than others and a little bit more risky, so likely to get a bug if there's a change introduced. We also looked at how often the code in that feature was modified. So if the same file is modified multiple times by more than 2 developers, there's a statistically higher chance that a bug will be introduced. We also ask how complex is the code base. If the team deems that this code has a lot of complexity and points where it could fail, then likelihood would be higher. So we use a scale, like I said, of 1 to 4 to keep it simpler, 1 being like the most heavy impact or likelihood, 4 being less likely, I should say. I've seen examples of other teams using 1 through 10. It just depends what works for you. So next we evaluate impact, and some questions to ask when calculating this are, is there a workaround available? So will our client be dead in the water if this feature falls flat on its face? Or is there another way they can achieve their goal? How much of the customer base is affected? In my work at Blackboard, opening a course affects everybody. So if you can't open a course, you can't use our system. Having a pretty icon next to a document listed in our content list, it sucks. It doesn't look pretty, but they can still use it. And then how critical is the area we are testing? If the bug was found in the area of such high importance, would we ship it even if it was marked as low priority? We get this from client data to understand what our users are doing. And last is the risk priority number, which is the product of our likelihood and impact. So as a team, you decide your threshold when you get this number. For us, most teams guide by 6 or lower, or what we agree to try to automate and include in a test suite. Anything higher, we have to take an assumed risk that maybe it's probably not worth our ROI. It's not worth the ROI on it. They are expensive to write, they are expensive to monitor, and they are expensive to maintain, and you have to make intelligent decisions on what not to do. We also know that the team is the feature expert, so Shangri-La cannot really weigh in unless we see something particularly egregious happening, which happens from time to time. So once you've agreed upon your threshold, as a team, decide the best way to test this. Hopefully you're not getting a full list of end-to-end tests. You're seeing a lot of unit type tests or lower level tests in there. So when we start to see it getting really heavy on end-to-end, every now and then we'll stop in and review and say, maybe we could fix this or tweak it. And if there's really no other way, then we'll just talk about it. One key point for every type of test suite that you indicate, you need to know how these are going to be monitored and maintained and by whom. So we also learned some lessons along the way. Start with a quarantine strategy really quickly. We didn't for the first couple iterations, and I really wish we had. It was a fast way to spot a flake that would fail to build. And developers, some were still good about it, but others were not as trusting once we saw those flakes come in. So to spot these, we rerun our failed tests, and if they pass again after they failed, we know we need to start investigating. It could be a race condition in the app, or it could be a problem with the test itself, but now we know to go in and get eyes on it. At that point, we do not fail our build. We still want tests to go in, knowing we're still going to get to it very quickly. Once in quarantine, the teams treat these tests as critical bugs. Just they're critical tests, so they've been deemed important enough to automate, now they need to get back into our pipeline. So the teams look at these, and Shangri-La will provide support to do that. We also monitor our quarantine tests with a separate job to make sure they are indeed working before reintroducing into the pipeline. Another observation is that everyone has a different idea of what is critical. So like I said before, have examples ready to go for your teams. It will make this work much faster. You won't get as many questions, well, what about this? It just makes it easier. Not everything can have a likelihood and impact of 1. And you can't test everything. So like I said in the beginning, we all had different testing philosophies, but by using risk analysis, it was starting to get easier to determine what was actually risky in the app. Where could we maybe cut back and scale back on our testing? So looking back to where we started, we've gone from a team of 2 to a team of 6 that are actually supporting the teams and not writing the tests. Our results are no longer all over the place. If we see a failure, it's more likely than not because of an actual bug, but we have a mechanism now to start looking at the ones that may not be. They're much faster than when we started. We've now increased the total number many times over of our original 33 to 165 tests today. And it takes about 30 minutes to run, which we're hoping to improve with some more work coming in. And we're only testing what's necessary. We had a lot of junk in there, like how to cancel 3 times. So our tests do continue to provide a gate, but we're now pushing them up earlier in the pipeline, not on merge. So as soon as you've created your PR, we're hoping next week to flip our switch that if our tests fail when you've submitted your PR, you're no longer able to merge your code at all. So there's more to come that we're really excited about in the very near future in Q2. So that's that. Okay.
A couple organizational questions. One, you mentioned that you were a product owner. Could you kind of give us an overview of Blackboard of, is there product owners, are there engineering managers, how's the structure? And then related to that, you talked a lot about automated testing. Do you have testing outside of automation in the organization?
Sure. So the short answer, and I'm happy to talk more in depth about our organization with you after this, just find me. So we don't have like a dedicated group of POs. This was a job new to me, and I like to call it the day I had to start Googling my job. And it was, Jason came in, the director I told you about, that had implemented this type of strategy many times over, and he reshaped QA itself as engineering productivity. Now within that, we do have our engineering department so we have product development, we have an engineering group, we have engineering productivity, and under engineering productivity now, we have what was traditionally our test group, now EP. We have CI, CD, we have DevOps, and do you remember any other group in there? Yes, and our SET group, all residing underneath the group. So now we are a very much cross-department team. So all of our Scrum teams then take out, well, we need a case for a test engineer because they are subject matter experts in a feature. They'll go usually embed onto a Scrum team and help guide testing. Those Scrum teams have developers from the engineering group, and we're working on getting more certified Scrum Masters. However, those are typically just basically team members that picked up the task. So Shangri-La is one of the first teams that got a certified one, which is just the single best decision I think we ever made. And so we're kind of all over the place. We have about 9 Scrum teams on the Ultra product that I talked about. I think we have about 3 or 4 on our classic product that most people probably know from 10 years ago. And then we have several just throughout on various other products. So that's how we're structured. No traditional training. A lot of what I did, I learned just looking up Agile blogs and PO roles and then learning through that. And there's tons of information out there. To answer your second question on do we have anything beyond automated testing? Yes. We are, if you think about what Blackboard is, we cannot deliver a product without looking at it without our own eyes. It is such a user-centered product, and there's a million workflows, and they are going to come up with ways that we can't even think of. I very much value manual testing, but I value doing it smartly. I don't like the notion of we need everything tested, now go test everything. I like to look at when we decide to manual test, which we do every sprint, we look at what's critical. We look at data in the cloud and what are our clients using? What are the top 10 most used features? We look at fields that they're populating in the database to say, oh, well, they're actually clicking adaptive release of content. We should really start going after those workflows in depth. Maybe not like key workflows in the sense of we want to get this out all the time for release, but enough that we want to make sure that we test it for every release going forward. And it takes time, so you have to make sure that if you're going to do manual testing and you want to do it sprint over sprint, that you can do it in a reasonable amount of time. When I first started at Blackboard 13 years ago, it took us 3 weeks to do a manual cycle test. We didn't have automation. And now we're able to do it in a night where we do have an outsourced team that does the bulk of our manual testing, but we also very much value it within the sprint. Just because we're here talking about automation doesn't mean it's not important. And the things that you don't automate from risk analysis, you should still test within the sprint that you're building the product to these features that you think could pose a potential risk at some point. But you just have to understand, I'm going to test it once this sprint, maybe twice, but I'm not going to maintain that test moving forward because it's expensive to maintain. Is a question over there?
How are you able to get leadership buy-in for changing the definition of QA?
It wasn't that tough. We just did it. So Jason was hired in September, or maybe late August. I met with him in September in DC, and he goes, oh, we have a new department name. okay, guess that's what we are. But what we didn't really broadcast it till we had our mission established, till we had our goals established, and showing we're not here to write tests for you. We are here to enable teams to do this. We're here to help, and you can make a case for why you might need us to do it for you. But I'd like to think of us as coaches. It's a very tough skill to learn. Testing is an art and a craft. And we have tons of experience that I don't think should lie solely on that one person on your Scrum team. Their job to me is to go in and teach their developers how to test and how to think quality and how to build it in without us. And what you get to, and we've noticed it with one Scrum team, they hardly needed their tester to start coming up with the list to facilitate. That's not to say they're not a needed member on the team. It just means our role evolves and we change and we're not there and we're not the gatekeeper anymore. Your whole team needs to own that. Anything else? You have 30 seconds. Just kidding.
How do you get the other teams to own quality? I'm back here.
Sorry.
How do you get other teams to own quality? Right now, where I'm at, QA, which we call QA still, owns quality, and it's hard to get the other teams to kind of own their quality. How did you do that?
Put a gate on and test. See if their work doesn't make it into develop. They get real irate really quick if it doesn't.
How do you do that as QA when you don't own that entire process? You have to get them to accept that that is a gate. How do you do that?
You have to. So what's worked for us is when we've been able to prevent a bug from going downstream, we've been very visible about it. So we'll say, look what our test actually caught and prevented from making it into production. When you can start getting concrete examples like that and showing them we need more, but we can't do it without your help. It goes better with less as a mandate, as a cry for help. Always ask, don't demand. But showing those concrete examples of what you're preventing from getting through definitely helps. It also helps if you show the monetary value of it. I know many people have done talks on it, but the cost of finding a bug early while in development versus finding one in production is in the thousands of dollars. I mean, there's a $25 difference to go in and just fix it right there versus a $5,000 difference or more when a client finds it, the people involved that have to triage that bug and then get it in the backlog and then wait because your client is no longer willing to upgrade until you make that bug fix.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
We're about out of time.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ashley.